Today we're going to be talking about the midpoint formula and how it relates, finding the midpoint when I'm looking at a coordinate plane. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to highlight my title. And I'm even going to highlight where it says midpoint formula. So I know when I have to access my notes, I know that this specific page relates to the midpoint formula. So before we talk about what the actual formula is, well, what does midpoint mean? When you hear the word midpoint, what do you immediately think of? Well, hopefully you would think it's the middle of a line segment. You could also say it's the center of a line segment. You can also say that if I take a line segment and I cut it in the middle, each of my pieces are congruent. So another word for midpoint would be center. So just kind of keep that in mind. We sometimes use this word center to trick you, or we could use the word middle, but hopefully when you hear the word middle, you know that it means midpoint. So ladies and gentlemen, when I'm looking for the middle of a line segment, usually my line segment, it's a point in the middle. So this point in the middle, this would represent an ordered pair. So if you take a look at your formula is an ordered pair. It reads, it has my parentheses and my comma, so this is my x coordinate, this is my y coordinate. So notice I take my first x value, I add it to my second x value, and then I divide by 2. That's how I get my x coordinate. How I get my y coordinate is I take my first y value, I add it to my second y value, and then I divide by 2. And I always have to write it as an ordered pair. So you might want to write that down because a lot of people accidentally forget to do that. My answer is always an ordered pair. Another way to remember the midpoint formula is the midpoint formula is just the average of your ordered pairs. So when I say the word average, remember that goes back to our statistics unit where we're talking about the mean. So how I find the mean of data is I add up all my values and I divide by 2. I divide by the number, well, I don't divide by 2. I add up all my numbers and I divide by my number of numbers. So if I'm given 2 ordered pairs, all I'm doing is finding the average. I'm taking my 2 x values, dividing by 2, and then I'm taking my 2 y values and dividing by 2. So let's actually start taking a look at this. It says, given the picture, determine the midpoint of each segment. So if I look at this line segment, I could probably guess that the midpoint would be in the middle, and I can, let me see if I know how to work this thing to small and make my pen smaller. Yep. So the midpoint would probably be right there, right? So I'm going to guess, and if I make that look a little prettier, it'd be right there. So I'm going to guess that the ordered pair would be -1, 4. That's my educated guess. But I'm going to use this formula to show that that really would be the midpoint. So I'm going to first determine what my ordered pairs are. So my first ordered pair is -5, 3. Oh, and I'm sorry, that's not a 3. That shouldn't be -1, 4. That should probably be -1, 3. So my first ordered pair is -5, 3. And my second ordered pair would be 3, 3. So now all I do is I plug it into this formula at the top. So my first x value is -5. So -5 plus my second x value is 3. All over 2. That's my x value, comma. Let's now do my y values. My first y value is 3, plus my second y value is 3, divided by 2. So now all I have to do is clean this up. So -5 plus 3 is -2. So I would have -2 over 2, comma. Do the y values. 3 plus 3 is 6 divided by 2. So now let's clean that up. -2 divided by 2 is -1. 6 divided by 2 is 3. Which, hey, I got my educated guess correctly. This picture was easier to find the midpoint because it was a straight line. It had a 0 slope. If I look at at this line, finding the midpoint might be a little bit more challenging. Some people are excellent at eyeballing it, and that's great. But if you can't eyeball it, the nice thing is you can always use this formula to help you out. So I'm going to eyeball my midpoint. I'm going to think my midpoint's right there. So I think my midpoint is 0, -1. But I'm going to actually test it by using the formula. So my A ordered pair is -5, -3. And my B ordered pair is 5, 1. It does not matter which x value is your first value and which x value is your second x value, as long as you keep it the same. So if this is the first x value I'm using, this is my first y value. If this is my first x value, that's going to be my first y value. So I just have to keep it the same. So all right, great. So let's plug it into the formula. So I know it's divided by 2, divided by 2. So my first x value, we're going to do this one down here, is -5. Plus my second x value, which is 5. And then if I do my y values, my first y value is -3. Plus my second y value is 1. So now I'm going to clean all this stuff up. And I can do the next step totally in my head. I can add it and then divide it in my head. -5 plus 5 is 0. 0 divided by 2 is 0. -3 plus 1 is -2. -2 divided by 2 is -1. But sure enough, if I were to go and plot 0, -1, it's exactly where I eyeballed it. Another fun little fact, if I apply the slope from A to my midpoint, so if I apply my slope, let me put this pen, from A to my midpoint, it would be up 1, 2 over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now the same slope better be between my midpoint and B. So up 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So yep, sure enough, that works. Awesome. So now look at this one, number 2. It says find the midpoint of the following. Notice I didn't give you a picture. So here's where really using the formula is going to be the easiest way, because you don't want to have to sketch a graph and then eyeball it and accidentally make a mistake. So if I highlight my x values so I can see it, I'll highlight them in red. And then I'll highlight my y values in blue because that's the common boo-boo. An ordered pair, x always comes first. So it's 3 plus 3 over 2, comma, 1 plus 7 over 2. I'm just following the formula. So now I'm going to clean it up. 3 plus 3 is 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 1 plus 7 is 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So my midpoint is 3, 4. So go ahead and pause this video, and I want you to try B on your own, and then unpause this video, and I'll have the answer up. So when you got this one, you should have gotten a fraction, but you could have also said a decimal. So the first one would have been 2 and 5 halves, or you can say 2 and 2.5. Personally, decimals I think are better, because if I ever made you graph 2, 2.5, you'd have a better idea of visualizing where that was. Let's look at example 3. Example 3 says find the middle of KL. Well, notice I see the word middle. When you see the word middle, what formula does that tell you to use? Well, it tells you to use the midpoint formula. Today you're learning a lot of formulas, and all of these formulas you have to memorize. If you don't memorize the formulas, your life is going to be a bit of a challenge. So, and you also need to know when you see clue words, which formula to use. So I see the word middle, I know the midpoint formula is the one I have to use. So, pause this video, solve this problem, unpause it, I'll have the answer on the board, or on the screen I should say. So your midpoint should be 2, 1. There's no variable for midpoint, so usually we go equals mid. We don't say equals m because m already stands for something. M already stands for slope. So you have to be very careful not to call midpoint m. These last problems down here is where they get a little bit trickier. So I'm working backwards. So I'm given an endpoint in the midpoint, and I want to find the other endpoint. So if I plot this on just a line segment, y is 0, 5, m is 3, 3. I want to find this other endpoint. So the midpoint formula says x1 plus x2 divided by 2 is going to equal my midpoint, right? So I'm just going to, and then it would say y1 plus y2 divided by 2 equals my y value of my midpoint. So I'm going to fill in what I know. So I'm going to say 0 plus x2, we don't know what x2 is, so I'm going to leave it x2, divided by 2, comma, 5y1 plus y2, I don't know what y2 is, so I'm going to put y2 over 2. And when I clean this up, it better equal 3, 3, because that's what my midpoint is. So 0 plus what divided by 2 equals 3? You just plug numbers in and think. Well, 0 plus 1 divided by 2, that's not going to work. 0 plus what divided by 2 is going to get me 3? 6. So x2 is 6. Now, 5 plus what divided by 2 equals 3? Well, the numerator has to be 6 again, right? Because 6 divided by 2 is 3. So y2 would have to be 1. 5 plus 1 is 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So my other ordered pair is 6, 1. That's one way you can do it. Another way you can do it, if I erase this, is you work backwards. Oh, I don't want to erase all of that. Let's erase this. If I work backwards, I divided by 2 last with my midpoint formula. So if let me just write my formula up here. x1 plus x2 over 2 and y1 plus y2 over 2. I divided by 2 last, correct? So I'm going to take my midpoint. You always start at your midpoint. I'm going to multiply by 2 because I'm doing the opposite. So I'm going to take my midpoint and I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to multiply by 2. 6, 6. I'm now going to take this ordered pair and instead of adding it, I'm going to subtract it. So I'm going to subtract 0, 5. So 6 minus 0 is 6. 6 minus 5 is 1. Which is exactly what I got last time. So you can choose which method you want to do it. This method I personally think is quicker, so I'm going to do it this method. Drawing your picture out, though, I will tell you, really tremendously helps. So be careful. So I'm going to erase this just so I have more space to work with for B. But if you ever get stuck, you can just rewind and rewatch and figure it out. So I'm going to plot my picture because it helps my brain. So my y value is -1, -3. And my midpoint is 5, 9. I'm looking for my other endpoint. So I start with my midpoint and I multiply it by 2. So I'm going to get 10, 18. I'm now going to subtract instead of add my endpoint. So I'm going to subtract -1, -3. Well, when you subtract negatives, what happens? These become positives. So I'm really adding. I'm essentially doing the opposite. So 10 plus 1 is 11. 18 plus 3 is 21. It never hurts to check. So if I take this ordered pair and this ordered pair and find the midpoint, -1 plus 11 is 10, divided by 2, that's 5. -3 plus 21, that's 18, divided by 2, is 9, so I know I did it correctly. Let's do the next one. My endpoint is 6, 0. My midpoint is 0, 2. I want to find this one. So, take my midpoint, multiply it by 2. 0, 4. I'm now going to subtract my endpoint. Subtract 6, 0. So 0 minus 6 is -6. 4 minus 0 is 4. And it never hurts to check. 6 plus -6 is 0, divided by 2 is 0. 0 plus 4 is 4, divided by 2 is 2. So I know I did it correct. So go ahead and pause this video and try part D. When you finish, unpause part D, and then your answer will be on the screen. So your answer would be 3, -8. So hopefully you understand the midpoint formula. So go ahead and keep following along with what you're supposed to do next.